I start with this selection of topics because this is a series that you've seen before. This is what we used when we were discussing socialism in Module 7. But here I want to transition from the strands of socialism that we've talked about to discuss instead one particular element of socialism, or growing out of the umbrella of socialism, which is communism. And what I want to do in this short review is an overview of the theories of Karl Marx, who is the co-creator of the principles of communism. It's important to realize that communism, despite many claims that it had nothing in common with its socialist brethren, grows out of the very same pressures that produce socialist movements worldwide. The pressures of the Industrial Revolution and the desire to fix society and make it better. And so the question is, what makes communism distinct and what makes it, or makes it perceive itself as a separate movement from the rest of their socialist brethren? Now, the origins of communism come from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. One of the ironies of the communist revolution and communist movements worldwide is that despite being something that's about the workers, it's actually created by two middle-class men. Marx was the son of a German lawyer, while Engels functionally paid Marx to develop his theories as the son of factory owners himself. But in terms of the real origin of communism, though they were developing their theories well before this, I want to highlight one particular date, namely the date or the year in which the Communist Manifesto is published, 1848. Now remember what happens in France in 1848. I talked about how the revolution was following the script, if you will. The middle class, the working class, the third estate was coming together and they were throwing off the shackles of tyranny. But what happened? Rather than coming together, rather than continuing to work together, the middle class and the working class split, and the middle class brutally and bloodily repressed the working class who were fighting for their national workshops. That's important because after 1848, as the communists assert, this proves more than anything that the third estate, that linkage of the people, if you will, is undone. That indeed workers would have to work for their own interests. They would have to work for their own needs. They couldn't rely on the middle class anymore. And for communists, they would present communism as the answer to the workers' needs. So what were the beliefs of communism? Well, communists see themselves as distinct in terms of the socialist tradition because of first, how they view history, and secondly, their solution. So first, the history. Now, Marx, contrary to popular opinion, is not, in and of himself, anti-capitalist. And the reason for that is his study of history, his scientific study of history, as he saw it, proved to him that history was nothing more than a history of class struggles. And the fight between the workers and the capitalists was simply the next stage in this fight between classes. And so he isn't anti-capitalist, but indeed sees capitalism as necessary, because he sees capitalism as a necessary prerequisite to create the conditions necessary for a communist revolution. And indeed, he argues that capitalism contains the seeds of its own destruction. Capitalism, by bringing about the means of production and accruing more and more wealth and more power in fewer and fewer hands, was simply creating a condition where, on the eve of a communist revolution, so few people at the top would have so much power and so much wealth that the mass of humanity would simply rise up and throw them off. This is why, for example, communists oppose the principles of nationalism. This is why in the Communist Manifesto, Marx calls on workers of the world to unite, arguing that workers had something in common that moved beyond whether they were German or French. Note that he doesn't say workers of Germany unite or workers of Italy unite. He wants workers of the world to recognize their common interests and their common enemy, which is the capitalist ruling class. So that's their view of history. The second element that makes them distinct is their view of the solution. If you remember, most socialists are about trying to change society, and they want to do so perhaps by being utopian and retreating from society. Some wish to do it by changing it through political reform. The communists believe that the system is so irrevocably broken, that the system is so stacked against the workers, that no reform would ever truly change anything, and no reform is possible. Indeed, for communists, the only solution is a revolution, a communist revolution that will seize the means of production and throw out the capitalists. And what does Marx believe will be assembled in its place? Well, Marx, like a lot of other socialists, believed that he will create, or the communists will create, a new society in which each, according to his ability, to each according to his needs, will create a society in which people will work for one another without that compulsion, and indeed will do so out of the altruism and goodness of their hearts that comes from the fact that they are all workers. Indeed, the belief is that by the workers seizing the means of production, they will fix the problems of industrial society and the competitive nature of that society. Now, after 1848, communism became an ever-present threat to established rulers who always feared that the workers were going to rise up. But while communists believed they had the answer for the workers, any number of other socialist movements rised up to say that they were the answer or that they spoke for the workers. As I mentioned previously, you got the rise of the Labour Party in Britain and the Social Democratic Party in Germany. Indeed, it's telling how successful these movements were to attract workers to a political cause that in 1912 the Social Democratic Party in Germany became one of the largest parties in Europe, the largest socialist parties in Europe. In addition, you had the growth of labor unions. These were organizations where workers were able to pool their resources and pool their efforts in an attempt to pressure businesses to support them. And in this, there were any number of benefits. It was not simply a sense of community amongst the workers, but it also was a situation where the workers could help one another. They would contribute dues to help those who were injured or hurt on the job. They would contribute dues that would allow them to sustain themselves through a strike for better pay or fewer hours. And indeed, the growing threat to at least the established order of these working class parties led some conservatives to try and find ways around them. The best example of this is Otto von Bismarck. He attempted to become a pioneer of social insurance. He provided laws for sickness and accident insurance, as well as old age and disability insurance. Now, he didn't do this out of any altruistic desire. He believed that if the government offered it, then the workers would become attracted to the government and turn away from these socialist parties. He's trying to co-opt the workers by, if you will, beating the socialists at their own game. But that a conservative like Bismarck is willing to support such sweeping social legislation simply underscores how much of a growing presence the working class interests and working class political interests were all across Europe during this period of the 19th century.